Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening to you. If you're in Pakistan, wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day. My name is Fasieh Mehta. I'm the program manager at the National Incubation Center. I'm live here from Islamabad with a wonderful panel here from all over, from Islamabad and Karachi, of experts, of people who have been impacted or who have seen the impact of COVID in the businesses, particularly startups in Pakistan. So today the topic that we will be talking about, और मैं अंग्रेजी और उर्दू में switch करता रहूँगा ताकि थोड़ी conversation का flow भी बरकरार रहे और मज़ा भी आए. और वो है कि कोविड का impact क्या आया पाकिस्तान के startups पे, ecosystem पे, businesses पे. इस हवाले से हमने नेशनल इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर ने बहुत सारे और इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर्स NIST कराची, NIC लाहौर, पेशावर और कोयटा और दीगर और स्टार्टअप्स के साथ मिलके एक सर्वे किया. पहला सर्वे तो जब वो मार्च और अप्रैल में किया, जब ये सब लॉकडाउन हो रहा था, एक स्केयर का फिजाज का मकाम था. हर कोई, हमने अपने इर्द गिर्द देखा स्टार्टअप्स में और मैंने ऑब्जर्व किया कि एक तो लोग बंद हो रहे हैं पर कुछ डर से हो रहे हैं कि ये सब हो जाएगा और अभी उनकी तरफ इम्पैक्ट नहीं आया, बस शट इट डाउन कर दे, बंद कर दो. हालांकि उनका बिजनेस इफेक्ट पॉजिटिवली हो सकता था. जैसे ही उन्होंने देखा कि नहीं, ये तो हमारे लिए एडवांटेज पॉइंट है, हम बेहतर हो सकते हैं, ओपन हुआ, गवर्नमेंट रेगुलेशंस आए, बहुत सारी चीज़ें चेंज हुई. पर ओवरऑल जो देखा गया कि 68% जो स्टार्टअप्स हैं जिनको सर्वे में हमारी फाइंडिंग है, उन्होंने डिमांड में रिडक्शन फेस की है. ठीक है, तकरीबन 30% ऐसे आप समझिए कि बिजनेसेस हैं जिनकी डिमांड इफेक्ट नहीं हुई. तो ज़्यादातर हमने देखा, जो और न्यूज़ भी हम पढ़ रहे हैं कि जी इकॉनमी श्रिंक हो रही है. 50% ने अपने ऑपरेशंस हॉल्ट कर दिए. ठीक है, ये बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट नंबर है. उसके बाद 20% सिर्फ लोग थे जिनको अपने एम्प्लॉइज ले ऑफ करने पड़े. मैं सिर्फ का लफ्ज़ क्यों बोल रहा हूँ कि ये बड़ी अच्छी बात है कि इन स्टार्टअप्स में से 80% ने अपने एम्प्लॉइज को ले ऑफ नहीं किया. नॉर्मली कॉर्पोरेट्स में या प्राइवेट सेक्टर में ये स्ट्रेटजी तो देखने में आती है कि पीपल वुड बी लेड ऑफ द मोमेंट बॉटम लाइन इज गेटिंग अफेक्टेड. बट दिस इज वेरी नाइस. क्या ये मिशन ड्रिवन है स्टार्टअप्स या एंटरप्रेन्योर्स की कॉज बहुत ज़्यादा क्लोज थी? क्या वजह थी? आज हम ये मुख्तलिफ लोगों से इसके ऊपर बात करेंगे और उसके perspective को जानेंगे. But before I proceed, let me quickly introduce the great panel that we have here today. We have here Jehan. She's known as the big bird in the IT industry. She is the one who single-handedly can be given the credit that she has done a lot for promoting the IT sector of Pakistan around the world. I've been seeing her for many, many years going around the world chanting about why Pakistan is the best in terms of this technical potential and not just being a cheaper labor market. Jehan also looks after the Pasha Pakistan Software House Association as a president and Nest.io, an incubation center based out of Karachi. Welcome, Jehan. We also have with us Misbah Naqvi. Misbah Naqvi works at I2I Ventures and she has amazing stories to tell today on the investments they've made, how they've been watching the space. And I really look forward to the insights of an investor's angle today at how they see COVID as a problem and also as an opportunity. Thank you for joining us, Misbah. We have with us today the veteran, the founder of Teamup and what we know as Jazz today, also the founder of Mobilink back in the days, Zouhair Khaliq Saab. Zouhair, I also would say, needs no introduction. People who know the corporate world or the digital world in the country knows the contribution of Zouhair in all that we know or have in our palms today, the mobile phone or the digital technology. Thank you for joining us, Zouhair. And we also have with us two amazing founders. Both are part of the NIC startup community, our extended family. Suniya Sadullah Khan from Mauqa Online, the co-founder of a startup which Uberized the domestic workforce in Pakistan while creating a ton of social impact, also creating major opportunities for businesses and also for people who are living at the bottom of the pyramid. Suniya brings with her an experience as a rocket scientist from Williams F1 while she was working, and also her husband and co-founder, both who were otherwise having great jobs and great career prospects, not that it is now, but it's a more painful one to go through, and started a startup. And with startup also raised good rounds and had great traction, but then went through what is we know as the new normal. How that affected Suniya, we'll know that. Thank you for joining us, Suniya. And then we have with us Ali Moeen. Ali Moeen is an experienced professional, a serial entrepreneur who's done this many times before and is now looking at, he was the co-founder of the startup called Roamer. Roamer is a ride-hailing service which doesn't go from point A to point B only, but is actually a ride by the hour. And they made amazing impact in the Twin Cities, and now they ventured into other cities as well. They also raised an amazing round. His co-founder and he himself actually gave up pretty lucrative careers to be devoted to this, and then they faced the wrath of COVID. And because they generated lots of employment opportunities for people and amazing traction. We'll also hear what stage he's at now, how he sees the market evolving, and how he saved himself and what kind of challenges he faced. Thank you for joining us, Ali. So मैं कॉन्वर्जेशन को स्टार्ट करता हूँ आपसे सनिया कि आप तो काम बड़ा ज़बरदस्त कर रहे थे और वो काम ऐसा था जिसमें डोमेस्टिक वर्कफोर्स ने जाके घरों में काम करना बहुत अच्छी ट्रैक्शन थी एंड आई नो द नंबर्स लेकिन एकदम से सब लोग डर गए कि घर में ना आए कोई हमें ना कोविड हो जाए और उसके बाद बिजनेस बड़ा सिवियरली इम्पैक्ट हुआ मैं ये भी जानता हूँ कि आपने डिसइंफेक्टेंट और दूसरी सर्विसेज को भी लॉन्च किया पिवट भी किया तो अगर आप क्विकली ये बताइए कि व्हाट वाज द फर्स्ट इनिशियल वीक जब कोविड हुआ और इम्पैक्ट हुआ वाज लाइक एंड आई नो दैट यू सफर्ड बिग टाइम यू टुक अ फाइनेंशियल हिट जी ओवर टू यू
Sure. Thank you, Fasieh. So for us, our helpers are going into people's houses. So we are a very high contact service. And we actually saw a decline happening in demand from about the end of February onwards. We couldn't pinpoint it, but we spoke to mentors that we had, and they kind of said, you know what, it could be related to COVID. Do you have a plan B? We hadn't thought of it at the time, but we actually started working on a plan B, which was if we had to shut down temporarily, what would that actually look like, and what are the steps we had to do? It was very stressful, couple of weeks trying to figure that out. But actually, when the lockdown happened on 23rd March, we said, okay, you know what, our worst fears have been realized. Now, though, that plan B that we thought we need to have, but we won't actually execute, we actually have to implement it. So that included major cost cutting because we, with the lockdown in Punjab and Islamabad, we couldn't operate either. So our priority was making sure our helpers were on paid leave, but also cutting costs. We unfortunately had to lay off 2/3 of our staff internally. We cut down on office space. We shifted to work from home. And then we said, okay, what do we need to do with our core team to try and regroup and survive this pandemic? At the same time, we launched a massive fundraising drive, and I'm happy to say that is one of the positives. The way customers, investors, and random public people just donated ration packs for our helpers or just money to ensure that we could put them on paid leave. That was great. And at the same time, we pivoted. We said, okay, the demand might not be for cleaning, but you know what? People want sanitization, they want disinfection. So let's just go all out on that. Within a month, we resumed operations on a very limited scale, but we're now slowly just building up on that, and now having kind of, I feel, survived the first few months, which were really rough. We're now just building on how we can grow in this new normal. I'll also have to say that I2I Ventures is one of our investors, and we kept them very close to our hearts. We kept them updated every single step on the way, saying, you know what, we're in this together. So anything, any help, any feedback, just give it to us. We will implement. We will see this through together.
That's excellent. Thank you, Suniya. So I believe it's a great thing that you did the fundraising campaign while you were going through that. और मुझे ये बात भी बहुत अच्छी लगी कि आपने जो हाईलाइट किया कि जो इन्वेस्टर्स हैं उनका एक मेंटर का भी और एक कोच का किरदार भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है ऐसे टाइम्स में. Let me ask the same question now to the other founder here, Ali. Ali, आपका बिजनेस भी कैसे अफेक्ट हुआ थोड़ा सा बताइए. शुरू में क्या हुआ, अब आप किस तरह से क्या are you still open? पहला सवाल ये दोनों से पहले सनिया आपसे. Are you operational now?
Yes, yeah.
And has the demand reduced, or are you going back to the normal ones? What it was previously?
It was, but it's increasing compared to what it was in May. So we're
because
seeing
of the pivot that you did. ठीक है. अब अली आप ऑपरेशनल हैं अभी या अभी भी आपके ऑपरेशंस halted हैं?
जी we're operational.
और अब आप बताइए कि शुरू में जो हुआ वो कैसे हुआ और आपने कैसे प्रैक्टिस का सस्टेन किया?
Yeah, so a very similar story to Suniya's. Towards the end of February, I think the last week of February is when we started seeing a little, uh, just a little drop in demand. It's not कोई बड़ा drop नहीं था, but it was a small enough drop to, get our attention. And our initial reaction was to attribute it to COVID. And then we followed that over the next couple of weeks. So once I think early March is when we knew for a fact that this is COVID. This gives us a drop, and then it was a major drop, right? So before the lockdown, I think it was March 12th is when we shut down operations, because as Suniya's, similar to Suniya's business, we have a high contact business where people are in a car with the driver. We felt it was our moral obligation to ensure that we are not helping and spread this disease. So we shut down operations in March, and a few weeks later, lockdown happened. We were shut down for about a month and a half, and then uske baad we had to relaunch operations. The way things stand at present, we're probably doing like 20% volumes. So I think this is around March 15th when my co-founder and I had this conversation, and there's two things we could have done at that point. We could have either conserved cash and live to fight another day, try to wait out the pandemic, and the other option was to pivot. And honestly, we knew back in March as well that this isn't going away in a year. Ek saal se pehle ye nahi jayega at the very least. So I don't know any company that can conserve cash, at least certainly not a company that's only done a seed stage that can conserve cash for a year. Even if we do manage to conserve cash for 12 months, best case scenario, and then we go back to market 12 months later and nobody in their right mind is going to want to invest in us, a company that has had no growth in 12 months. Because investors are not emotional beings. They look at the bottom line, they look at growth. If you don't have growth, they're not going to invest in you. So we knew very early on March 15th, we decided we were going to pivot. Luckily, we were working on something. We had been working on something for about 6 months. We shifted our focus onto that. We've accelerated that. Hopefully, we'll have a new product out in, I want to say 2 weeks, but it might take 3 weeks. So you guys will find out. We did not lay off anyone. We did take salary cuts.
Excellent. Okay.
All senior staff took salary. Founders took 100% salary cut.
Okay, very good.
And then senior staff took voluntary cuts. So some of them volunteered to take up to 50% off, because we wanted to make sure that our lower paid employees, unko hum nuksan na hone dein. We wanted to make sure we retain them. These are people who are in the trenches, who've fought the good fight for us for the last year or so. We felt moral obligation to these guys, because I know I can go get a job any day. मुझे इतना मसला नहीं होगा, लेकिन जो आपका accountant है या आपका office boy है, it's very unlikely someone's going to hire them. So collectively as an organization, we decided we're going to conserve cash and make sure that we don't have to lay off anyone. And alhamdulillah, we haven't had to lay off anyone yet.
Ali, this is great. Thank you, Sir, for sharing these insights. मुझे ये बताइए कि जब आपने अपने employees को ये बताया कि आप as founders अपनी salary नहीं draw करेंगे और आपकी senior management भी pay cut ले रही है, just to make sure that you stay afloat and they also have a job, did it impact the performance?
We didn't actually tell those who did not take pay cuts, we did not tell them. कोई फायदा नहीं था उनको बताने का. I mean, these are very hard working people. They've contributed a lot. I mean, this team जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, about 9 people. There was a 6-month period where they worked 7 days a week. I did not take time off. So there was no way I was gonna, lay them off unless I absolutely had to. So this is the only way we could make it happen. I mean, we didn't want to advertise it. They when they come in, they put their best effort anyway.
Thank you. This is very nice to know, and let's see also how investor perspective has been so far. Misbah, एक startup इधर मौजूद हैं जिनमें आपने investment की, और भी startups थे. आप हमारे जो शुरू की insights, ये मैं जिस survey का जिक्र किया, उसमें हमने ये देखा कि 42% जो है ऐसे startups हैं जिन्होंने हमें feedback दिया. 42% उनमें से experienced a reduced valuation. अच्छा, ये है temporary है. I'm sure कि after things go back to normal, it will go back up again. जैसे हम stocks में देख रहे हैं, बाकी जगहों में भी देख रहे हैं. लेकिन एक किरदार सनिया ने बताया जो investors का बड़ा अच्छा है, to come on board as mentors and coaches and guides. What did you experience as an investor? What was this happening? Where do you see the current situation, how restricted it is, or do you see this as an opportunity coming through in disguise?
Sure, thank you. And interesting that you mentioned what your survey results are, Fasieh, because I2I had done a survey right at the beginning of the pandemic. I think we released it in the 3rd week of April. So it's really interesting to see what people were saying then and how things have changed now. I mean, one number I remember is that at that point, 49% of the companies, we surveyed over 100, 49% of those companies said that they are experiencing delays in closing the investments that were already underway. And like 37% of them had said that they're not raising investment right now, right? So if you look at that 49% number, and then the number you're talking about where people have seen a reduction in valuation, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of overlap between these two responses, where companies that had not closed may have had to go back to the drawing board. I think from an investor's perspective, it's a really interesting situation. Of course, like you called it the new normal earlier. None of us have been through anything like this in our lifetimes, right? And I think our first response was of fear, like everybody else. Ab kya hoga? You know, what is the unknown? We don't know what's going to happen. Is everything going to collapse? Are we going to live to see another day, et cetera, et cetera? So I think once that initial fear that you mentioned earlier on as well kind of came down and people realized, okay, this is not going away in a few weeks. This is something we have to live with, and we have to adjust our life and how we deal with all of this. We started seeing a shift in the way people started approaching it. So once, you know, the first response was fear and people held back. And then the next response was, okay, how can we take advantage of the situation? So we've seen in the market over the last 4.5 months that some sectors have done quite well and have started to grow, and some have really taken a hit, right? So like travel and tourism, for example, obviously has taken a hit. Both Ali and Suniya have seen tough times based on their business models and what they've been focusing on. On the other hand, we've all seen an increase in e-commerce, in e-groceries, in deliveries, although obviously, you know, Baikia and Kareem and others have had issues because of some of the restrictions in some cities. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag. From an investor's perspective, I think if you were to be really, you know, a vulture investor, you'd be sitting there rubbing your hands, ki acha chalo, ab, you know, bada murgha milega aur kam paise mein milega, because a lot of people would expect that valuations would come down because the prospects have gone down. And that will be the case. In some cases, valuations will go down. Valuations are all driven by what those future projections of revenue and the future revenue potential is, the future growth potential. And if that growth is going to slow down, then valuations will obviously come down a little bit. I think what we've seen is that those investors that were already in deals most of them have seen the deal through. Maybe what happened was there was a little bit of impact on how the broader market opportunity was evaluated. So let's say if you were expecting a company to, you know, have to raise their next round 6 months from now, maybe some of those adjustments were made to say, acha, 6 months mein nahi, ye log unko 1 saal lagega before the next round can be raised, just because they will not get to the milestones that are required before they can raise that money until in 6 months. It'll probably take another 6 after that. So some of these adjustments have had to be made. I think sector-wise also, from a broader perspective, this is not only in Asia, but more globally. Obviously, some sectors are doing better than others. So there are global trends towards services that have started to thrive. In Pakistan, we've seen a big uptake in adoption of technology and technology-based services where there was a lot of hesitation before, right? So whether it's you know, electronic payments, or whether it's groceries on demand or other things, where from an investor perspective, these sectors have become more interesting because customers are using them more and customers are getting comfortable. One thing that we're still looking out for is कि इन सब जहाँ पे positive चीजें हुई हैं, उनमें से कौन सी चीजें जो है वो short term है. So let's say, you know, there's an uptake in health tech. How much of that is going to bounce back to in-person doctor visits once COVID is over or dies down or is under control, for example, right?
एक interesting बात की आपने. आपके ख्याल में जो inherent base है हमारी as humans, the ability, the craving for a social connection, क्या वो वापस आएगी, नहीं आएगी, या effect हो जाएगी? क्या लोग डॉक्टर्स के पास जाना चाहेंगे, नहीं जाना चाहेंगे?
I think so. I think दोनों चीजें होंगी. I think एक लिहाज से बहुत सारे लोग का टेक्नोलॉजी से कंफर्टेबल हो गए हैं और वो रहेगा. जहाँ पे कन्वीनियंस है वो रहेगा. लेकिन जहाँ पे like you said social interaction है और just the you know we have a lack of outlets in Pakistan. बहुत कम चीजें entertainment के लिए हम सब shopping जाते हैं. Excuse me, to have a good, you know, we go to the mall. Even if we're not buying something, we go to the mall for an evening out. हम walk around कर लेते हैं, window shopping कर लेते हैं, you know, McDonald's में खाना खा लेते हैं, चाट खा लेते हैं. So I feel like people will want to come back to that, some of that, and so some of that retail will bounce back. But I think the convenience factor is here to stay. So I think the convenience that people feel in like being able to make electronic payments, being able to order something एक कल आ गया, भाई आप नहीं जा सकते हैं बाहर. Those are the industries that are going to continue to do well.
अच्छी आपने इंसाइट्स दी कि कुछ इंडस्ट्रीज जो बेसिकली कन्वीनियंस पे ज्यादा फोकस थी काम करी. कहा जाता है कि तुम्हारा डिजिटलाइजेशन का जिम्मेदार कौन है, CIO, CTO या कोविड ने डिजिटलाइजेशन को पाकिस्तान में बड़ा एक्सेलरेट कर दिया और आप जहां इसमें बहुत अरसे से मौजूद हैं इसकी बहुत बड़ी एडवोकेट हैं. पर हम आजकल अपने दूसरी न्यूज़ भी देख रहे हैं. तो ये जब डिजिटलाइजेशन हो रही है, स्टार्टअप्स की बात हो रही है, बहुत अरसे बाद स्मॉल मीडियम और कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री के अलावा स्टार्टअप की डेफिनेशन बहुत रिसेंटली देखने को मिली. और अब एक इदारे ने तो रिकग्नाइज किया, लेकिन स्टेट बैंक, FBR सब अपनी अपनी डेफिनेशन से डिफाइन करते हैं एज एन SME स्टार्टअप को. जो लोन्स दिए गए फॉर कैश इंजेक्शन, जिसको किलोवाट्स पे और बिजली के बिल के साथ अटैच किया गया. स्टार्टअप फ्रीलांसर्स घर से काम करते हैं, उनके बिजली के बिल के साथ वो उनको मराद कैसे मिलेगी. हमारी जो स्टार्टअप सर्वे है उसमें जो हमें देखने को मिला कि आपको किस किस्म की सपोर्ट चाहिए, ज़्यादातर लोगों ने जहाँ यही कहा कि हमें कैश इंजेक्शन चाहिए कि हम ये जो टेम्पररी पीरियड है इसे सस्टेन कर सकें, इसी तरह हम कैश फ्लो में अफ्लोट रह सकें, अपनी टीम के साथ सर्वाइव कर सकें, जो बात अली ने की. तो आप बताइए, आप गवर्नमेंट से भी काफ़ी इंटरेक्ट करती हैं, बहुत सारे स्टार्टअप्स के साथ और इंडस्ट्री के साथ उठती बैठती हैं कि ये गैप कहाँ है और अभी भी गवर्नमेंट कोई ऐसे अगर इनिशिएटिव्स ले रही है या नहीं ले रही है. तो इफ यू कुड शेड सम लाइट ऑन दैट प्लीज.
So yeah, Fasieh, but first I want to start off with, I think all three of our organizations, I2I, yourself and us, we've all done our research during this period to find out what's happening with our startup ecosystem, what kind of help they need, how they're handling this entire situation. And that's very important because unless we do that, we don't know what kind of support they need either from the government or from us, right? What was interesting to see was that most of them were able to handle it much better than the bigger businesses, simply because they are startups and they can pivot and they are able to do it very quickly. So we found that they were less impacted than the big businesses simply because they knew how to take hold of that challenge. They had the mentors and the support that they needed to quickly do what needed to be done. And that is, you know, that's so good to see because that means all of us have mentored them well. That means they have the support system that they needed. Yes, cash is a problem. Some of them who have investors found that the investors were very understanding and some of them got, you know, some additional cash or understanding from the investors in you know, in changing the milestones, things like that, what Misbah was talking about. I think that was extremely important because I think investors don't want that money to go, you know, downhill. So they will support that. But the kind of work that the startups did, they were the ones who actually came to help, whether it was government organizations, whether it was normal consumers, whether it was businesses. They came up with plans which helped each and every person. So when we talk about the government, Digital Pakistan reached out and Botsify, which is one of our startups, actually provided them with a chatbot that very quickly was able to answer questions and things like that. Many of the startups that are in the edtech and healthcare space quickly pivoted and made sure that they were able to support the entire community and not just startups within the space. So you saw all that happening. You saw, you know, if they were edtech startups, they made sure that they provided things at a much cheaper rate or even for free for a given period of time. And then you had the healthcare startups, especially mental health. So Relive Now, Sehat Kahani, all these people made sure that they were able to provide the linkages that were important So Relive Now, the founder told me that, you know, we want to provide 15, 20 minutes of consultation for stress that people are facing due to COVID specifically. And so that's extremely important, you know, especially during this time. Then there are startups that, especially in the edtech space, that provide teacher training, that were able to help schools go online much faster, because schools and teachers don't know how to use technology to provide the learning that was needed. And, you know, all that, I think in itself is extremely important. The money part, many of them were able to, you know, they got some revenue out of the work that they were doing. And because of that, they were able to survive. None of them actually, most of them said they did not lay off people. As Ali was pointing out, most of them, the founders, took a pay cut or didn't take a salary at all. And that helped them because they don't have a large expenses as far as operational costs are concerned. Most of them are startups and they are operating either from home, they were operating out of our space. Some of them had offices which they then let go, and some of them went into a shared space together so that they could cover this period without any significant impact. Startups who are working in the disability space, startups like Wonder Tree and Connect Here, they made sure that products that they were creating were transformed so that the people who were suffering, who were either hard of hearing, in the case of Connect Here, and children with disabilities who were now having to spend all their time at home, that new games and new products were created. In the case of Connect Here, everything that was being conveyed by the government or the private sector had to be converted into sign language or videos so that people with hearing disabilities were also kept in tune with what was happening and how they were supposed to handle COVID. I wish the government had been able to, I know they said that they were going to give, they asked banks actually, they didn't. They asked banks to give money to SMEs and to startups. But unfortunately, even then, banks were asking for collateral. And what collateral do startups have? So unfortunately, that didn't work out. In that situation, I think the government, unfortunately, has not been able to support the ecosystem as much as they could have. I think they should have. I know that the government gave out money for groceries and things like that, but the startups don't fall into that space. And people who needed it, yes, got, you know, people who didn't have money to eat and stuff like that, got help. But unfortunately for businesses to survive, especially startup businesses, I think they survived because they themselves are able to, and they themselves were strong enough. It had nothing to do with government support. It had more to do with ecosystem support. It had more to do with mentors.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jehan. So yeah, startups survived with least amount of support available from the public side of things, right? Public sector, but the ecosystem itself and the startups themselves with the perseverance, the founders with their grit, with their passion, that was driving them at the core of whatever they were doing was surviving. So here we've seen in the survey that...
Just one more thing I'd like to add. Not only did they survive themselves, but they were able to support the corporate sector and make sure that they were able to bring the corporate sector online so that they could continue their businesses, which I think is amazing because a lot of corporates never looked at startups as being anything. And now suddenly these are...
I agree with you.
Yeah, the small players who help them come online.
बिल्कुल और मैं ज़ाती तौर पे समझता हूँ कि जो अपॉर्चुनिटी भी ओपन अप हुई है वो ये है कि बहुत सारे लोगों ने देखा है कि बहुत कुछ करना है, बहुत लोगों को, बहुत एंटिटीज को, बिजनेसेस को डिजिटलाइज करना है, टियर 2 टियर 3 सिटीज में और छोटे बिजनेसेस को ऑनलाइन लेके जाना है. फ्रीलांसर्स के लिए भी अपॉर्चुनिटी ओपन हुई है, स्टार्टअप्स के लिए भी हुई है और बहुत सारे यंग प्रोफेशनल्स के लिए हुई है और उन कारोबारी लोगों के लिए भी हुई है कि मुझे आईटी की नॉलेज, मेरे घर में मेरा भाई भतीजा बेटा आईटी वाला या लड़की बेटी ना हो तब भी मुझे ऑनलाइन जाना है. ये जो रियलाइजेशन है ये बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है और मेरे ख्याल में ज़ोहैर, इफ आई स्टार्ट फ्रॉम दिस, गलत ना होगा कहना कि ये वो जो कहते हैं ना कि जो स्टार्टअप्स जो है वो कोई लेगेसी को फॉलो कर रहे हैं, वो नहीं है कि द स्मॉल ईट द बिग वर्ल्ड जिसकी बात अभी, सो द बिग ईट द स्मॉल वर्ल्ड जिसकी बात अभी जाने की. इट्स द फास्ट ईट द स्लो. कि जिसने बहुत जल्दी प्रेप किया, जिसने बहुत जल्दी पेनिट्रेट किया, वो ले गया नंबर, बाजी ले गया। मैं आपसे ज़ोहैर इसमें ये सवाल करूंगा कि ज़्यादातर लोगों ने सर्वे में कहा कि कैश इंजेक्शन चाहिए, लोन चाहिए, सपोर्ट चाहिए, रिलैक्स टर्म पे लोन चाहिए गवर्नमेंट से, और इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर्स जो कि ज़्यादातर ऐसे इदारे हैं जो स्टार्टअप्स की ग्रोथ में फंक्शन कर रहे हैं कंट्री में, दे लुक अप टू दैम. What role do you think the incubation centers or the government can play still, because this is here to stay, businesses still are suffering and we need to pick it up. वरना ये 8-9 साल से जो एफर्ट आप सबने हमने मिलके की है इस इकोसिस्टम को खड़ा करने में, ये बहुत पीछे रह जाएगी. जी ज़ोहैर.
So again, there are obviously two answers to the two questions there. As far as the incubation centers are concerned, I think we have been taking up that job, to an extent. हमारा रोल जो है, it's about supporting the startups in terms of their thought process, in terms of their tactics, in terms of their strategies, guiding them onto more, how to pivot to the next stage. And I think that has to continue. The mentorship role will have to continue. As everybody said, this is around to stay for maybe a year or more. So we can't think of short-term measures. Everything has to be a longer term, at least a medium term, if not a long term, where we need to make sure that the startups are thinking correctly. They are able to come back and seek the right advice, the right mentorship from the incubation centers. And I think I would not hesitate in saying that most of us are geared up for that. We, as the people at the incubation center, I think we have the capacity to give that support, give that guidance, give that mentorship. And also I think the relationship with the startups is fairly good, very reliable. There's a level of trust between the two. And I think that will continue to grow as we go down this route, which is not an easy one for anybody. But as everybody said here, I think the magic here is that the startups have demonstrated nimbleness, entrepreneurial qualities, which is exactly what we teach every day at the incubation center. And I think that will come in as a very major sort of quality, if you will, of success in the future. And as Jehan mentioned, a lot of the bigger companies fail to move quickly enough because they didn't gear up enough. They've never had the mental process to react that fast to things. And I think that will be the differentiating factor going forward as the world changes very rapidly. And as everybody else has said, as Misbah said, as Jehan said, कि वो जो एक digital thought process है, that will need to continue to grow. And I see it every day, anecdotally. Even the guy who used to deliver fresh mangoes to my place used to come in and demand cash when he brought in the case of mangoes. But now he's saying, it's perfectly all right, ये मेरा bank account है, आप यहाँ transfer कर दें. My wife's tailor, who would always want to first see the money before he, did anything else, is now, is very happy to, take cash up front. And so they're all rapidly going towards digitization. They're opening bank accounts. They're happy to take a jazz cash payment, for example. And I think that's a great thing going forward into the future. This is something, as you said, Fasieh, who is responsible for our digitization, and it happens to be COVID at this point in time, which is fine. We'll take it. We are not fussy in that regard. We'll take that and we'll move forward. I think that's a great positive development. As Jehan said also, I think from the government's point of view, it's been very slow. I don't think that there has been a recognition that there is this sector out there which is struggling, which needs help. And it's not only about cash loans, for example, which they've tried to encourage banks. And again, the banking system in Pakistan is very slow to react. They're just not nimble enough. They've not had the exposure or the thought process to react to something like this. So I think that will take its own time. But again, from the government point of view, it's more about looking at other resources. For example, within the government treasuries today, with the USF fund, with the Ignite Technology Fund, there is cash available, which doesn't have to be, let's say, found in another budget. It's right there. and it has to be repurposed to a certain extent.
Yes.
And I think that by doing that, you will provide an amazing new stimulus to the startup ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Pakistan. And it will only be for the good. When we look back in 5 years on this moment, we will say, if the government reacts in the right way and redeploys some of those funds, I think it'll be an amazing turning point for startups, for the ecosystem in general. Apart from this, I think there are easier things to do, which may or may not require budget approvals, but things like, just making sure that there are tax exemptions for startups. As you mentioned, the SCCP in the last few weeks has finally classified startups as an entity, a legal entity in itself. Now, if it's followed by things like saying, let's give them a tax break for, I don't know, 2 years, for example, let them survive and generate the cash flows that they need to build those businesses. Similarly, I think it's very important to encourage investors by giving them a tax break. In the UK, for example, where I've lived for a long time, there is something called the Small Enterprise Investment Scheme, which basically means that if you invest in a startup to a limited amount, and there are slabs, for example, £50,000 and £100,000, you then, if the startup doesn't succeed, it fails or is unable to meet its targets, Her Majesty's Revenue Services, just like FBR here, are able to actually give a rebate to the investor through his tax return. And that mitigates the investment that the investor is making down to half. So a lot of these people are in the 45 and 50% tax bracket. And if they get half of that money back, it's a mitigating factor, and it's also a good encouragement for investors to say, "Okay, I'm not going to lose all the money I'm going to put into a new startup, because some of it will be reimbursed by the government at some point." I think those are very fundamental steps that the government should be thinking about right now. Similarly, waiving of customs duties. A lot of the very basic but technology-oriented equipment that some of these startups will need to further their aims, and even very simple things, given that we are now in this lockdown environment, even laptops and PCs and mobile phones, if we made it easier for people to acquire them if at a cheaper price, I think that would go a long way to sustaining some of these startups and their businesses. So it's not just focused around cash handouts. There's a series of things that can be done to encourage and to support the ecosystem, as far as I'm concerned.
These are great points. Thank you so much, Zouhair. Yeah, so we've seen that most of the startups, and during the survey mentioned that they do not have enough cash flows. So their runway was, for 1 to 3 months max. Some startups said they have runway up to 6 months, and that was like less than 20%. But most didn't have beyond 3 months. So मेरा ये सवाल अब सनिया आपसे भी होगा. Did you have a similar situation? If yes, what was those immediate strategies that helped in conserving this? And I do see Misbah also smiling at you, so I'm sure that you had a lot of help and support and guidance from Misbah and many people like her. But if you could share something with people who are listening to us, and that some tips and tricks that they can now also incorporate, because this is here to stay for a while.
Sure. So we had actually just launched in Lahore in November. We were talking to investors about raising a Series A and going to Karachi. So things were very different in February. And then when we saw COVID happening, demand going down, those investor conversations were kind of getting on hold. We realized, okay, you know what? This is not happening. How much cash runway do we have, and what are the steps we need to take? So as I mentioned before, reducing our staff, ensuring our helpers stayed with us and remained on paid leave no matter what. Reducing office space, taking salary cuts as well. So both the founders, we took salary cuts, and the core team that remained also took salary cuts as well. And I think the difficulty was also kind of having a smaller team and still trying to motivate everybody to say, you know what, we are going to get through this, and we're going to survive, and then we're going to build upon. So, very similar to what Ali said, these are people who've put in so many hours, so many extra work, and then you're saying, you know what, we're really sorry. please take a salary cut. We did it ourselves, but we had to ask other people. It was one of the very tough decisions, but it's something we needed to do. So yeah, those are kind of the steps that we had to take to just conserve cash. And then we just kind of applied for as many grants internationally as were possible. And we just say we managed to get some as well. But I'd just like to say one thing in all of this, tips and tricks, is complete transparency. And by that, I mean transparency with your employees, with your team, transparency with your customers. So we were very transparent about why we are not serving or why we will not send anybody to a customer's home, even when they would message us and say, I need someone to clean my house. It's okay. I'll, spray them with disinfectant. We're like, we're sorry. We are also a social enterprise. There are some things that we will not do. Once we get our SOPs up, we'll be back in service. And most importantly, also transparency with our investors. We had weekly calls with them, daily WhatsApp messages, just letting them know what was happening. So again, tips and tricks, clear, constant communication and transparency with everybody. So our employees, everybody knew the cash situation. They knew what was expected of them and what we were also trying to do to just get out of this COVID initial few months.
Okay, thank you. Ali, आपने भी तो अपने ऑफिस का रेंट पे किया होगा. आपके भी ऑफिसेस के रेंट जा रहे होंगे even while you were not running operations or had reduced demand. तो कैश फ्लो कैसे मैनेज हुआ? और ये एक तो चलिए आपने बताया कि आप लोगों ने फाउंडर्स ने और मैनेजमेंट ने सैलरी कट्स लिए. आप कोई टिप्स देना चाहेंगे इसके हवाले से कैश को कैसे कंजर्व कर सकते हैं स्टार्टअप्स इन क्रंचिंग सच crunch time?
Yeah, I think उसके लिए सबसे पहले तो you need to have a self awareness के and an understanding of how things are. So a lot of people are, in general, people बहुत ज़्यादा optimistic होते हैं कि चले जाएगा, will blow away and things will be back to normal. But luckily for us, we knew from day one that this is not going away anytime soon. So we need to, accelerate plan B and then figure out very, very quickly how much money we need for that. Because the money we have conserved is for Roma as it is today, but that's obviously not taking off anytime soon. So we needed to, rebudget completely. This is how much money we need. This is how much runway we have. How much time we have to execute this thing. Unfortunately, we were very close to closing a round in March that got deferred. That's the way it is. Hopefully, वो talks फिर से resume हो जाएंगी very soon. But we wanted to make sure that when we go to raise a round, our investors see. We have a responsibility, a moral obligation to our existing investors. So we have to have, as Suniya said, complete transparency with them as well. Okay, this is the situation. You've trusted us with your money. There is not much we can do over the next 12 months. The mobility space as we know it in Pakistan is completely disrupted. All the way from BookMe down to the Ubers, Careems, Airlift, Swivel, जितने आप जानते हैं, आदि बंद हो गई हैं या बंद पड़ी हुई हैं या pillion ban बना वजह से bike is struggling. So we knew that we cannot justify continuing business as usual to our investors. So we went back to them. We were honest with them. We told them, we showed them what the situation was, where we assumed it would end up in 12 months, and then we gave them that plan B. This is what we can do with the money that we have. How much more money we'll need down the line. So basically, we ended up doing an entirely new business plan, completely new projections for the next 2 years. A lot of work, like it needs to be done, and then we're now in conversations with the investors for the pivot. So that's what we've been doing. As far as we still have our office till the end of this month. We won't need it. We've had the office for 3 months. किसी ने use नहीं किया. But
आप rent दे रहे थे office का 3 महीने?
Yeah, we've been paying because there was a lockdown for a month. Then our office.
तो आपके जो landlord थे उन्होंने आपको relax नहीं किया? कोई terms आपके साथ discuss नहीं हुई कि यार हम छोटा सा एक startup हैं हम कैसे?
We spoke to our landlord. Unfortunately, he could not at that point. But then so there was a 1 month lockdown, and then there was a 3-week seal because of our sectors getting sealed. So wo bhi band raha. And also we didn't want all our people going in and getting infected, right? So we had them all work from home. Luckily, I come from a technology background, so we've been working from home for years now. So that wasn't very hard for us to do. So we were conserving cash in the form of not paying utility bills and going forward not paying for this office in the near future. But we'll have to get a facility pretty soon as well.
दोनों ने बड़ी अच्छी बात की. Transparency, communication with employees, with clients, with investors. Misbah, आप भी investor हैं, Mauqa online में भी और बाकी startups में भी. So ये जो बात अभी जिन्होंने की कि identify करें fluff को, then trim and skim the fat and go lean. You as an investor, I believe, have much more to share in addition to as well to what they've added. So your tips for people who are struggling and or who are about to raise rounds, because दोनों ने अपनी examples की कि दोनों round के phase में थे जब COVID हो गया, raise कर रहे थे.
Sure. And I think I just want to emphasize that jo Ali or Suniya ne kaha in terms of communication is really, really important. I mean, investors hate surprises, even good ones. So I think just stay close to your investors and communicate. I think I can speak for Mauqa Online and Suniya and Mustafa who've done a really good job. Like we said, we've been on calls on a weekly basis. As an investor, we wanted to be balanced and not be too intrusive and, you know, keep calling them up and saying, ab kya ho raha hai? But at the same time, let them sort of make decisions, but help them where help was needed and think through things. Even sometimes it just helps talking through something. And when you talk through it, you realize some things come to you yourself. So it's not about us saying we know better, let us tell you how to do it. It's about being about effectively communicating with the startup from the investor's perspective, and for the startup to communicate clearly with the investor as well. I think Ali's tips on like where money can be saved, and of course they're going through a pivot, so it's a slightly different conversation. Like Suniya said earlier, you know, looking at operational questions, where can you trim the fat? Where can you actually put off certain decisions for expenditures? But I think what's important is to see investors as allies. They've already invested in you, right? So I would categorize two different conversations. One is investors that are already on with you. They've already invested in you. They're not potential investors, they are your investors. They're already in for the ride, right? They're already in the boat with you. So if the boat is sinking, everybody needs to come together and help the boat from sinking. So, you know, think of them as allies, and together you have to help each other get to the next level. At our end, at I2I, we actually also put aside certain amount in emergency funds from a reserve perspective, so that if any of our startups did come to a really difficult situation where we wanted to help them out with some emergency funding, we would be able to do that. So that was something that we did, just anticipating a potential emergency need for cash. On the other hand, I would say that for potential investors, for startups that are in the middle of raising a round and are talking to potential investors, and this also happened to us as we were in the middle of some pipeline discussions over the last 6 months or so, I think it's important to go back to the table. Like Ali said, go back to the drawing board, redo your numbers. It doesn't matter if you have to redo something. It doesn't matter if you have to pivot. Even if you're not pivoting, but the outlook has changed, be open and honest and redo the numbers to the best of your abilities. Because what that will do is allow you to set your course based on what you think is about to happen. And that's very important, because redo your numbers and know your numbers. And this goes for all startups. If you don't know how much cash you need on a monthly basis, you will not know that you're running out of cash unless it's too late. So I think everybody who's running a business needs to be very focused on every month, how much are they spending and how much runway, from a startup perspective, how much runway do you have? So that you can then plan to say, Acha, theek hai, if I'm going to run out of money in 6 months, so usse koi 3 to 4 mahine pehle, I need to make sure that I start talking to investors and lining up potential new investors. So those are some of the things that I would say. And again, I think the idea is to look at your investors as partners and seek their help where you need it, rather than expect that it's not a student-teacher relationship, really. It's the founders that are doing all the work. Those of us in the background are kind of helping and supporting and sort of pushing them forward where we can. But they are the ones that are actually making the tough decisions, that are making taking things forward. So I think it's important to highlight that, because a lot of times people get intimidated. What will the investor say? Investor holds the money, investor writes the check. I mean, yes, there are times when there's that balance of power is uneven. But I think it's important to hold your own as a startup and understand that at the end of the day, you do know your business best. But reach out to people that may have done it before. Reach out to people that may have different perspectives that can guide you as you sort of address some of these challenges.
बिल्कुल ठीक है. I really appreciate the feedback जो आप सबने दिया. देखिए, जहाँ बात ये है कि इन सब ने तो बिल्कुल बहुत अच्छा काम किया, लेकिन ये स्टोरी बहुत सारे लोगों तक पहुँचती नहीं है. हमारे यहाँ हमारे हीरोज को अदरवाइज हम सेलिब्रेट नहीं करते. ये हीरोज हैं जिन्होंने जॉब्स भी रिटेन की, जिन्होंने अगेंस्ट द टाइड स्विम किया और उसको रोक के रखा. उसका इम्पैक्ट नीचे नहीं जाने दिया और अपने बिजनेस को सर्वाइव किया। ये स्टोरीज हैं जो बाकियों को सुनानी है हमने। ये इंस्पिरेशंस हैं जो सनिया की हैं, अली की हैं, सेहत कहानी की हैं और बहुत सारे और लोग से और स्टार्टअप्स की, और यंग लोग हैं ये जिन्होंने इतना कुछ जल्दी मेरे ख्याल में लर्न कर रहे हैं और मुसलसल अभी ओपन है। जो बात अभी बड़ी अच्छी मिसबा ने की कि बीइंग ओपन टुवर्ड्स द स्टिमुलस एंड फीडबैक एंड बीइंग फ्लेक्सिबल। what do you think can be done to take this forward? कैसे हम कर सकते हैं? Although हम अपनी अपनी कैपेसिटी में तो कर रहे हैं, लेकिन collectively हम क्या कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि ये बातें हमारे टीवी पे नहीं आती, नेगेटिव न्यूज पहले आ जाती हैं, ट्विटर पे पहले आ जाती हैं, पॉजिटिव न्यूज बड़ी मुश्किल से सर्वाइव करती हैं। आप स्माइल कर रही हैं, आपको ये ज्यादा पता है। और दूसरी चीज मेरी आपसे एक सवाल ये होगा बिफोर अभी मूव टुवर्ड्स द Q&A आफ्टर ज़ुहैर्स कमेंट्स, कि एक बात पीछे अभी ज़ुहैर ने की थी ऑन एंटरप्राइज इन्वेस्टमेंट स्कीम के ऊपर, गिविंग एन एग्जांपल फ्रॉम यूके, कि गवर्नमेंट जो है उसको सब्सिडी देनी चाहिए या उसको रिबेट देनी चाहिए टू दोज हु आर इन्वेस्टिंग। ये तो आइडियल टाइम था कि लोगों को ओपन कर दिया जाता कि वो स्टार्टअप्स में पैसे डाल देते, क्राउड फंडिंग ओपन हो जाती। मतलब रेडिकल टाइम्स, रेडिकल डिसीजंस लेने चाहिए थे। सो दोनों पे जवाब दीजिएगा, ए द सेलिब्रेशन ऑफ दीज ग्रेट सक्सेसेस, एंड बी गवर्नमेंट क्यों रिलक्टेंट है रेडिकल डिसीजंस ऐसे लेने में, खासतौर पे क्राउड फंडिंग के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से।
जी बिल्कुल, नहीं आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं। आई थिंक जितने लोगों को हम सेलिब्रेट नहीं करते हैं, इट्स रियली सैड। और ये सिर्फ स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम के बारे में नहीं है, हमारे जनरली हमारे पॉपुलेशन में जो भी काम अच्छा कर रहा होता है उसको सेलिब्रेट नहीं करते हैं। बाहर दुनिया में ये स्टोरीज नहीं पहुंचती हैं, एंड दैट्स एक्सट्रीमली सैड कंसिडरिंग कितने टीवी चैनल्स हैं हमारे पास जो ब्रॉडकास्ट करते हैं। दे कुड बी शेयरिंग दी स्टोरीज। एक दो हैं ऐसे जो कभी कभी स्टोरीज हमारी शेयर कर लेते हैं, अगर उनको हम लोग रीच आउट करें कि भाई ये फलां स्टार्टअप ने इतना अच्छा काम किया है, आप देखें तो इसके बारे में बात करें, तो देयर आर सम गुड जर्नलिस्ट आउट देयर जो कर देते हैं। बट आई थिंक मैंने तो गिव अप कर दिया है ऑन द पब्लिक ब्रॉडकास्टिंग इंडस्ट्री। और मैंने अपना शो एक पहले भी मेरा होता था इन द लाइन ऑफ वायर, जिसपे मैं इनोवेटर्स के बारे में बात करती थी। अब मैंने एक नया शो शुरू किया है, मैपिंग इनोवेशन। एंड व्हाट आई एम गोइंग टू डू इज कि जितने मुझे लोग मिलेंगे जिनके बारे में मैं बात कर सकती हूँ, जिनको इंटरव्यू कर सकती हूँ, टू मेक श्योर दैट देयर वॉइसेस आर हर्ड, वो मैं करूँगी।
मुझे आपका स्टूडियो याद है, आपके पुराने ऑफिस में जब मैं आता था, पुराने वाले ऑफिस में इन द लाइन ऑफ फायर, दफ्तर के सामने ही वो सेटअप था। आई रिमेंबर दैट।
And that was, through help from Rabia Gharib, who really helped me during that time. I would never have thought of it. उसने मुझसे कहा कि भैया आप इतने लोगों को जानती हैं, सबके की स्टोरीज तो शेयर करें। तो I did that, and now I've started this again because I think it's extremely important to get out the stories that exist. चाहे वो incubators, accelerators में से हो या वैसे हो, there are a lot of young people and startups who are doing work on their own without help from any of us. तो उनकी भी तो स्टोरीज शेयर करनी चाहिए। तो मेरे ख्याल में तो मैंने शुरू कर दिया, एंड आई विल कंटिन्यू। We were talking about where Misbah said, that startup should look at the figures and know where they stand. I think I would suggest, and I use this platform to promote the fact that Jawad Ahmed Fareed has just launched a book called Founder Puzzles, जिसमें exactly यही चीज उन्होंने step by step सिखाई है कि किस तरह keep on top of your figures and realize when you should shut down, when you should pivot, when you should continue doing what you're doing or do it better. I think it's the best book that startup founders can read. And I've offered on my blog a few free copies that I'm buying from Jawad, and he has thrown in some copies as well. So उसमें से मेरे में अभी 5-6 किताबें available हैं. So if any of your participants want a copy of the book free, this is a PDF version. He's not printing it. He's being environmentally friendly. तो आप मुझे बता दें, तो I will make sure that you get it. Okay, so that's another thing. Third thing is, yes, what Zouhair said, I hear these stories from my brother all the time, who runs now a small business in London. And it's just such a simple thing to do to support investors and to support businesses, small businesses. We hear all the time that the government doesn't have money, but what about the money that we are getting from World Bank or Asian Development Bank and all of that? I thought the purpose of that money was actually to make sure that the economy thrives and the economy grows. And the best way to grow the economy is to support the people who are actually running the economy or supporting the running of the economy. So mere khayal mein that, it's a no-brainer. It should have been done. And as far as the money at Ignite and USF is concerned, I'm sorry, it's not being used. Why is it sitting there? It should be used. I mean, kabhi kisi ko grant de dena is not enough. There are so many startups doing amazing things. Make sure it's transparent. Don't just give it to anybody. Maybe work with the incubators and accelerators to make sure that the right startups are identified, but use that money. It'll help the country. It'll help the startups as well. And also, Fasieh, one of the things that I think none of us has touched on yet, which you may have wanted to cover later, but policies. Policies that don't negatively impact the growing ecosystem.
बिल्कुल आप किसी को कहेंगे कि आप बैन कर रहे हैं
Zouhair and I talk about it all the time, and it's just, and Misbah is very vocal on social media as well. Come on, don't do this, please. Don't shut down the gaming industry. It's such a good industry for young people to be in. Don't shut down anything. Yes, make sure that there are policies, but please talk to us so that we can guide you, so that the policies you come up with are policies that don't affect an ecosystem that is just emerging.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just add 2 examples to that before we close, Fasieh, that to Jehan's point, I couldn't agree more. And 2 examples we'll give, and we've talked about these in different forums, so it's not something new, but maybe people on this call haven't heard. And again, it's going out to everybody who might be listening, is that, we, on one hand, we want to encourage foreign investment. We want to bring in investment to the country. On the other hand, in the draft investment policy that is being put together right now, we've said that, you can bring your money in, but we may not let you take the profits out if we have a balance of payments issue and if we have a foreign exchange issue. So you can't, those are contradictory statements, right? On one hand, the government has put out these loans for small businesses, but startups are not eligible. And then when those startups are able to get grants from international NGOs because they might be social enterprises or because there might be a specific aspect where an NGO outside the country wants to help people in Pakistan, banks don't touch that transaction. So banks have been sitting on these transactions saying, "Hum to nahi kar sakte ji, aap jaake registration karayein." So there are a lot of, Pakistan is a very high friction market. And especially at times like this, where you have COVID and you have a unusual situation, this is even more important for the government to come in and take policies which are going to help the sector grow. And regulate for the 95% that are doing good. Don't regulate for the 5% that are chores. We always take a negative perspective and say, paise aayenge to kya hoga, bahar chale jayenge to kya hoga. So there's a lot that we need to change in our mindset collectively.
सही कह रही हैं, ज़ोहैर मैं इस बात पे आता हूँ, ठीक है, जहाँ भी माशाल्लाह बहुत अरसे से इस बात पे एडवोकेट कर रही हैं, हम भी अपनी कैपेसिटी में, आप जानते हैं, NIC में सक्सेस स्टोरीज को बहुत ज़्यादा पॉजिटिवली शेयर कर रहे हैं, इस पे काम भी कर रहे हैं, और आपके जहाँ के आप सबके तवज्जुह से हम जिन फोरम्स पे आप बैठते हैं उन तक भी ये बातें पहुंचाते हैं ताकि ये बात और फैले और ज़्यादा पॉजिटिव बातें हों और लोग अली और सुनिया जैसे लोगों को अप्रोच करें और इनसे कहें कि भाई हमने भी इस चीज़ में आना है, हमने बेहतर करना है। लेकिन जो दूसरी बात बड़ी अच्छी की कि पॉलिसी का बड़ा एक इम्पैक्ट है और पॉलिसी मेकिंग में आपका जहाँ का सबका हमका एक किरदार है, आपका ज़्यादा माशाल्लाह इन्फ्लुएंस है इस पे और तजुर्बा भी है। तो जब पॉलिसी इस तरह की स्ट्रैंगुलेटेड होंगी और ना भी हो, लेकिन कोई एक न्यूज़ आती है तो आपको पता है कि क्या इम्पैक्ट आता है। जैसे ग्लोबली हमें एविएशन में शटडाउन कर दिया गया, एक तरह से the doors were shut for us for the world because of someone saying something and later on then retracting it, but इमेज बड़ा इम्पैक्ट करता है। इसी तरह ये इमेज, इसी तरह आज थोड़ी देर पहले ट्विटर पे जो हमने देखा रेजिग्नेशंस हो रहे हैं कुछ ऐसे पाकिस्तानियों के जो अपने अच्छी चीजें गिव अप करके पाकिस्तान में आए। तो मेरा आपसे सिर्फ एक ये क्वेश्चन होगा कि ये पॉलिसीज में इतनी ताखीर है, इसे कैसे एक्सेलरेट किया जा सकता है? और ये जो आप लोग, शुक्र है कि आप जैसे लोगों की वॉइस वहाँ पे फॉरम्स पे मौजूद है टू ब्रिंग सम सैनिटी इनटू दिस पिक्चर, तो उसे कैसे ये इंश्योर किया जाए कि ये कभी भी विदाउट प्राइवेट सेक्टर कंसल्टेशन ऐसा मामला हो ही ना, कि किसी एक फर्द वाहिद की हाथ में ना हो कि भाई आओ इसको बंद कर दो।
I think it's a very difficult conundrum. हमारे मुल्क में इस वक्त we're going through a turning point in this area. One of the things I'll emphasize again, which I said in my earlier comments, and what the others have said as well, हमारे यहाँ it's creditable that the government has gone out and handed funds to people who are unable to eat and buy groceries and so on. But there's an old Chinese saying which says, you know, if you give somebody fish, then they'll come back to have fish tomorrow. But if you teach them how to fish, then they'll catch their own fish. And I think I'd like to think that what we as the National Incubation Center are doing, what the Nest.io is doing, what the VCs are doing right now, is helping people to learn how to fish for themselves. And I think it's very important for the government, the policymakers, to also turn our attention to that particular aspect, which is not only to just give out handouts. देखिए वो various programs हैं हमारे आजकल जो कि, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But अगर आप वो handout देते जाएंगे तो people have the habit कि कल वो फिर आ जाएंगे आपके सामने. But अगर उनको आप कोई सिखाएंगे, कोई हुनर सिखाएंगे, कोई support देंगे in learning a new trade and learning a new business, then they will generate not only business for themselves but an income for themselves, but also for several others, जैसे कि अभी आज की comments में सबसे वाज़ेह हुआ है. And I think that's a very important area. आपने कहा कि we sit on various forums where we are able to voice our opinions. We do so every day, as Jehan mentioned. Sometimes we feel like it's a never-ending story, but we have to continue to do that. One, very much the emphasis on celebrating successes, no matter how small. I think that's very important. We do it obviously through our own sources. The social media is very active on it, but I think it's equally important to call the national media, the various independent media groups, to also come and take up that voice for the people who are making little successes on a daily basis. I think that encourages other people to go out and imitate that, to copy it and say, agar wo kar sakte hain, to phir hum bhi kar sakte hain. So I think that's a very positive message which has to go out. And also I think it's very important that we continue to focus on this whole concept of digital Pakistan. Despite today's very sad news, it is the only way forward. देखें, हम एक ज़माने में बड़े मजाकिया तौर पे कहते होते कि जी अफ्रीका में ऐसे है, अफ्रीका में ऐसे है. Believe me, all those people have moved tremendously forward, and we are lagging behind because of our inability to change, to adapt, to embrace the new cultures, the new technologies that are coming forward. And I think it is absolutely vital, it's absolutely imperative on us as a nation today, as policymakers, as within the government, in the private sector, to continue to promote that on a daily basis, because Hamari salvation for 220 million people in this country is digitization, and the businesses and the incomes and the jobs that will be generated as a result of that phenomena. And I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, one of the reasons I at my age, I still work every day is absolutely to try and realize that vision and that dream for Pakistan. I can't emphasize that enough.
So here you're a young guy. What are you talking about?
I try and fool people.
I'm really inspired by the amazing work, mashallah. Thank you, Jehan. Thank you, Zouhair. Badi अच्छी बातें आप दोनों ने कही. I believe all of us, industry and everyone, looks up to you guys for what you do, the path that you have set for us. So अब थोड़ा से questions जल्दी से ले लेते हैं. मेरे ख्याल में time हमने पास over हो गया है. Quickly we'll do that. एक तो मैं ये जानना चाहूँगा, and I'll take this. I'll start from you, Misbah. Way forward, what do you recommend for startups to deal with these COVID challenges based on the experiences? And एक financing की बात हुई, एक अब investment की बात है, ये कैसे approach करना है, किनको करना है, किस तरह से. लाजमी नहीं है कि जो sectors जिन्होंने positively impact किया है वो survive कर रहे हैं, कुछ और भी हैं, अच्छी stories और भी जगहों पे निकल रही हैं, कैसे demonstrate करें. एक थोड़ा सा जो मैं feel कर रहा हूँ, एक culture, एक vibe ये आ रही है कि आप health tech हैं, आप क्या कहते हैं ब्लॉकचेन में है, एआई में है, टेक्नोलॉजीज में, तो अभी बात कर लें, इन्वेस्टमेंट मिल जाएगी, which is not correct. People are in talks otherwise from other sectors as well. So if you could shed some light in terms of, very briefly, what's the way forward? What do you recommend for startups to deal with COVID challenges based on your experience?
Sure. बिल्कुल बहुत सारे sectors हैं. I think it's important to say that some sectors are going to be a little tough in the short run. But at the end of the day, आप हमारी आबादी देखें और हमारा population देखें और आप ये देखें कि economic opportunity कितनी है. The needs and wants of this population are not about to change because COVID has come in. So if there is always going to be an opportunity to provide goods and services to Pakistanis. I think what startups need to do is take a step back, not be driven by ego and say, "Bas, I've done one thing, so bas yahi karenge." I mean, the example of Roma and what Ali shared in terms of how they took a step back and said, what do we need to do now if in the short run, we're not going to be able to run our business at all, and going through a pivot. So if you're in a market where you think that there's a short-term crunch, but that things in the medium term could get better, talk to people, talk to peers, talk to other people in the market, read about things that are happening in other countries, in other markets, learn from examples, and see if you need to reassess your business plan. If you need to reassess it, this is the time to do it. Okay. It may mean that you need to stop certain things for a while. It may mean that you need to be a little extra conscious of like cash, etc. for a short term. But अगर आप confident हैं और अगर आपको ये evidence है कि in the medium term that what you're working on will still work, by all means, stick with it. It may be a little tough for you to get new investment at this time for something that has not been proven and tested. But at the same time, we talk to founders on a weekly basis where people are still coming up with ideas. People are still coming up with things. Kuch sector, jaise aapne kaha Fasieh, there are some things that people are focusing on, like e-groceries or something that's online. A lot of traditional businesses are trying to go online. Usme freelancers वगैरह के पास भी there are opportunities. Jehan gave some great examples of startups at the Nest that are working with larger corporates.
नहीं, मैं एक छोटी सी एग्जांपल देता हूँ. देखें, हार्डवेयर बिजनेसेस जो थे ना, जो कोई ना कोई प्रोडक्ट हार्डवेयर यहाँ बना रहे थे, वो बहुत बुरी तरह इम्पैक्ट हुए. दुनिया की फैक्ट्री, the factory of the world was China. It got shut down, and everyone's supply chain got very, very adversely affected. So indigenous production was not a thing to be considered. पहले कुछ सोचता भी नहीं था ना. चिप मंगवानी है, तार मंगवानी है, चाइना से मंगवानी है. अब सबने जब सप्लाई चेन डिसरप्ट हुई, कॉस्ट जरी बात है डिफरेंट है, तो अब एक इन्वेस्टर का भी थोड़ा सा थीसिस चेंज हुआ, ठीक है, और अब लोग कह रहे हैं. सो आई एग्री, थैंक यू. एक चीज मैं क्विकली और पूछना चाहूंगा मिसबा आप से बिफोर, ये भी एक सवाल यहाँ पे किया गया है कि एंड दिस इज बाय आई बिलीव सुहेल अब्बास. उनका सवाल है कि where can we get funding or sponsorship for social initiatives supporting entrepreneurs during COVID? मेरे ख्याल में इसकी मुराद शायद सोशल एंटरप्राइजेस है.
दोनों चीजें हो सकती हैं. It could be if they're talking about social initiatives that are supporting entrepreneurs, then those are potentially grant-making organizations or government organizations or facilities that could be taken. I think that you need to look at both a federal level and a provincial level. For example, there's a Sindh Enterprise Board that is actually now reaching out and seeing how they can help certain entrepreneurs in Sindh actually get access to funding so that they could continue with their startups, etc. So us tarah ki opportunities hain. Suniya mentioned, international grants and other people that will come in and help. If you are touching, I mean, the good thing is in Pakistan right now, a lot of businesses can be justified from an impact perspective because impact can be defined pretty broadly. Right? So from people that are looking to make impact investments or are impact investors or are grant-making organizations, businesses like Romer and Mauqa Online are totally eligible for most of those because they are, at the end of the day, employing people that are from lower income backgrounds and providing employment and generating positive value in the market. So those are the kind of organizations also that people could look at. And there are a few funds, international mostly, that are also focused on this.
Okay, thank you. Hassan ul Haq कहते हैं, edtech startups are on the rise, but is it plausible to depend on these startups in bridging the gap that exists in Pakistan without the government, which is very important, and I believe government should follow, private sector always leads. If not, how can the startups pivot to engage more people like the marginalized communities in the northwestern side of Pakistan? Who from the panelists would like to address this? Very important, nice question. Jehan.
So I don't think that startups by themselves can address the education problem. The government will have to get involved. They will provide the technology and the support, but the government will, especially if you're addressing the public education sector and you're addressing people who are outside the school system, then there is no way that these youngsters can do it on their own. It can be, so grant organizations can perhaps also support them because they need the money to increase their reach and their infrastructure in order to reach a larger number of people. But to some extent they can, but yes, the Pakistan market is so big and so many people are out of school. And right now, I mean, everybody's out of school, but even otherwise, education is not reaching everyone. And there are millions of people who are not getting access to education. So definitely, they will need support from the government, from corporates who are interested in helping change this literacy scenario right now, and also from grant organizations. But they have great ideas. Once they get that support, I have no doubt that they can change the situation drastically.
Okay. लेकिन अगर ये कहना भी मेरे ख्याल में शायद गलत ना हो, if you agree with me, जहाँ के चूंकि अब कोविड ने ना बाउंड्रीज सारी आपकी वो खत्म कर दी हैं, कोई फिजिकल डेमोग्राफिक बाउंड्री तो अब एग्जिस्ट नहीं करती, तो आप नॉर्थ वजीरिस्तान से या गिलगित बल्तिस्तान से यूथ को, बच्चों को ऑनबोर्ड करना चाहें, पढ़ाना चाहें उनकी लैंग्वेज के अंदर, तो वो बहुत आसान हो गया है, चाहे वो कंटेंट क्रिएशन हो, चाहे वो प्लेटफॉर्म्स हो, जहाँ जहाँ एटलीस्ट इस वक्त टेलीकम्युनिकेशन पेनिट्रेशन मौजूद है और 83 मिलियन.
You are quite right. There are no borders, magar ek to connectivity, so access is an issue in especially Gilgit-Baltistan right now. Language is another issue. So there are startups that are looking at, providing education online in different languages. So whether it's Hindi, Punjabi, Pashto. So, they're even looking at addressing these huge problems. So yes, there are no borders, but there are issues and, they need to be tackled. Yeah.
बिल्कुल, लेकिन आप भी बिल्कुल, you should not lose hope. The gentleman who asked the question, proceed. What is the worst that could happen? You may fail, but you'll be better off. You'll be closer to the objective. And do knock on the doors. You never know who might be there behind the door to help you out. This question is interesting. I would like only Ali and Suniya to respond to it, if you agree or disagree to it. So the question is by Mr. Sadullah. He says that he's sharing a personal experience. That when you guys are in a problem, particularly a cash flow problem, do expect understanding from your investors, but do not expect any sympathy from them. Understanding and sympathy are not similar commodities when talking to investors. Ali, you agree or you don't? मैं इसलिए मिसबा से नहीं पूछा कि वो इन्वेस्टर है, मैं चाह रहा हूँ कि जिन्होंने इन्वेस्टर्स के साथ डील किया जरा वो भी अपना पर्सपेक्टिव दे दें.
Yeah, certainly expect them to understand and empathize with you. Again, it depends on what kind of traction your business has. You may have investors who may give you extend you credit, who give you short-term capital injection to make sure that you can overcome this hurdle. And that there's companies in Pakistan who've gone through that situation. So I don't think that's 100% true. I mean, there will be VCs out there, particularly strategic investors who see a long-term vision. There's two kinds of investors. There's a private investor who's $20,000 probably said not, but someone who sees a long-term relationship with you may actually give you cash injection. Misbah will probably tell you as well that उन्होंने शायद किया भी हो.
मैं भी उनकी तरफ आऊँगा क्योंकि चाह रहा हूँ कि पहले मैं startup से सुनूँ और फिर.
Yeah, but I don't agree, no.
Okay, good. Suniya, do you agree?
I think it also depends on the type of investors you've chosen. And I argued this before that getting into a contract with an investor is actually like marrying someone. You have to be sure that their vision and their values are very aligned with what you have for your company as well. So if you are looking for someone, I mean, if your investor was someone who is literally just a shark, probably that would be the case. But if you've actually said you want a meaningful relationship with your investor and you're going to grow the company together, they will be sympathizing with you in this. They will be understanding, and they will actually just be their resources to help you grow and get back on your feet.
ये कहना मेरे ख्याल में गलत तो नहीं होगा Misbah कि people buy people before they buy the product. The investment that an investor makes is in the founder first, in the vision, in that vision that they're aligned with, rather than the product of the business. So I believe आपका जवाब वही होगा कि of course this has to be mix of this. Last question है जी आपके लिए मेरा Zouhair, ये अकीब Akib Nuhulla ने पूछा कि COVID has given us the heads up that every organization should create a sinking fund for dumping money in so that the organizations don't have cash flow, salary, rent problems next time a pandemic like COVID arrives. ये एक अच्छी opportunity भी है market में. कोई ऐसा sink fund, कोई support fund पाकिस्तान के इस startup ecosystem के लिए आप जैसे लोग जो lead कर रहे हैं इसको lead करने का कर सकते हैं. Your thoughts on this, please.
So I think in principle, yes, I agree. That's a great idea, a sinking fund of some sort. The questions then will arise: who will manage that? Who will grow it? Who will keep it safe? As I mentioned earlier, we have a couple of very amazing funds sitting there already within the government structure today, which could easily be redeployed. And I think our energy should be focused on saying how we can make that happen in the shortest possible time. And that would be my short answer to the question at this stage. If there is no other questions, Fasieh, I just wanted to do a couple more comments, if you allow. We constantly talk about investment and opportunity and jobs and everything else. And I just wanted to say that there is another smaller side to this, which is no less important today in the environment that we are living in, which is that don't lose hope, because things like this have happened in the past. In the last century, there are so many events which have happened in similar ways. People have lost their lives, people have lost their jobs. And the comment I would like to say is, instead of fretting about it a lot of the time, obviously you must spend the time doing what you're doing for your business, making it thrive, making it survive. Also at this time where you're all locked in and are not able to get out that much, focus on a few more things. And I just want to leave this thought. It's a bit different from the usual technical stuff that we talk about. And it's about focusing on gratitude, focusing on the fact that if you are safe, your family is safe, your friends are safe, thank goodness. Allah ka shukr kare, you have it good, because not everybody does. Focus on family. Take the time, instead of resenting the kids intruding on yourselves, give them a little bit more time. This is the time you will have. And when this moves on, you'll go back to your usual everyday crazy routine. So take that time. Take the time for family, take the time for friends, for your spouse, for your partner. Focus on your health a little bit and your whole well-being, because again, it's something we tend to neglect when we're running around on a daily basis with the business of life. And also, this is a great time with everybody getting more online to maybe develop some new skills. And they don't even have to be online skills. Learn to play cards if you've never done that before, or something which is fairly banal, but is something that you've not done before. And develop new skills. Let's say if you wanted to play a new game, for example, take the time out for yourself a little bit as well, and stop worrying so much, because this too shall pass, as the famous word, inshallah, and things will look up again. So keep that also in mind as you go away from this talk today.
Thank you so much. What wonderful words to end this conversation. Jehan, please.
What Zouhair said, very good advice. Think of yourself, focus on yourself. And in addition to learning, I think a lot of startups are already looking at how they can improve their platform, how they can make sure that the strategies that they're working on, how can they make them better. So when they're not busy in the business of running the business, some of them are focusing on, how to improve their project management, how to use more tools, how to give more flexibility to their team members, even if in the short term they make mistakes. So that kind of thing, I think startups are during this time showing their real character, and whatever we can do to help, we should all be prepared to do it.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I believe what you, the industry, the startups, the founders have shown us is this perseverance, which I believe is such a huge inspiration. But also all these great words that all of you said, we should see the light at the end of the tunnel. We should stick with what is with us, what we have, positivity. Zouhair ने बड़ी अच्छी बात कही कि आपके इर्द गिर्द आपके प्यारे आज मौजूद हैं, उनके साथ जो आप वक्त गुजार रहे हैं, बहुत बड़ी नेमत है. शायद हम घर ना बैठते और उनके साथ वो वक्त ना गुजारते तो हमें इस बात का भी अंदाज़ा ना होता कि हमारे घर वाले, हमारे घर में जो पार्टनर्स हैं, स्पाउस हैं, बच्चे हैं, उनका हमारी लाइफ में क्या कंट्रीब्यूशन है और उनकी डेली लाइफ में हो क्या रहा होता है। और बहुत पर्सपेक्टिव मिला, बहुत ज़रूरी है ये। बड़ी अच्छी बातचीत सबने की, कैश प्रिजर्वेंस के कंजर्वेशन के ऊपर भी बड़ी अच्छी बात की, नोइंग योर नंबर्स के ऊपर बड़ी बात हुई आज, कस्टम ड्यूटी और दूसरी टैक्स एग्जम्पशंस, टैक्स रिबेट्स के हवाले से, लैपटॉप, पीसीज और सेलफोन्स को सब्सिडाइज करने के हवाले से ओवर कम्युनिकेट करें, ट्रांसपेरेंट रहें, ऑनेस्ट रहें अपने क्लाइंट्स, अपने टीम और अपने इन्वेस्टर्स के साथ। ये बात भी बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट की कि जो आपके चाहे वो इन्वेस्टर्स हों या पार्टनर्स हों, दे डोंट लाइक सरप्राइजेस, उनको लूप में लें, उनसे पूछें, उनसे बात करें, फ्लेक्सिबल रहें, अपने नंबर्स जो हैं उसको देखते रहिए। और बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बाकी चीज़ें भी आप सबने जो की, मेरे ख्याल में दिस आर ग्रेट थिंग्स to take further. I would only say we are doing a series of events on health and well-being as well. We've done one, we'll do more again. What just Zouhair pointed out, we cover in that area a lot. So इसलिए मैंने आज उस पर इतना टच नहीं किया और मैंने ज़्यादा गुफ्तगू बिजनेस ओरिएंटेड और इन्वेस्टर के लिए रखी. Once again, thank you ladies and gentlemen, all those wonderful people who joined us on online social media platforms in Zoom and stayed together for such long, and all those who are so crazily asking for the book by Jawad Fareed. He's amazing guy, big fan of his. वो जहाँ ने ये कह दिया, पेंडोरा बॉक्स खोल दिया है और चैट में और क्वेश्चन आंसर्स में बहुत सारे लोगों ने सवाल किए, जहाँ ने लिंक शेयर कर दिया है ब्लॉग का, आप जाइए, ढूंढिए, एंजॉय कीजिए, लर्न कीजिए, सीखते रहिए, सिखाते रहिए, अपना ख्याल रखिए, हैव अ ग्रेट डे एंड ग्रेट इवनिंग, स्पेंड दिस टाइम during Eid with your loved ones, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you. Hafiz.
Thank you, Fasieh.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys. Hafiz.
You will be getting a feedback form, all of you, so please do fill that.